Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I know everybody wants to talk about, think about, play with, and use AI in all of our businesses. And that's why I'm so excited about today's guest, because this is somebody who, take it from someone who follows today's guest on LinkedIn, this is someone who I don't know how he does it, but he absolutely stays on top of all the things that are happening in the world of AI so that we business owners don't have to get distracted by that. I'm so excited for us to learn from him. Let me introduce you to John Bush. John is the founder of Wave 4, which is an AI transformation partner that has helped over 20 businesses get results with AI. Results? Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Before Wave 4, he worked as a cybersecurity consultant at KPMG, doing security tool implementation for some of the largest businesses in the US. So let's talk about Wave 4 a little bit, because they help businesses identify and implement the highest value ways to leverage AI across their operations. They guide clients from strategy through execution, delivering practical, results-driven AI solutions that create operational leverage and drive revenue. Did you catch that last piece? So it's not just about playing with it. It's not about being fun. It's actually about getting tangible results. That's why I'm so excited for all of us to learn from him today, because he is a brilliant mind in the world of AI who also understands how to move businesses forward. So I'm excited about this one. Let's dive straight into my interview with John Bush. All right, John, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Awesome, Brian. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Heck yes, I'm so excited to geek out about AI with you here on the air today. But before we do that, you've got to take us beyond the bio. Who's John? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, so I used to work in enterprise cybersecurity, as you said. And that's kind of how I went down this whole AI rabbit hole. About a little over a year ago, I watched my engineers code with AI at work for the first time. And that was like a pretty profound experience, because I'd never seen them work that quickly before. And as someone like working in technology, I think all of us kind of were like, oh, AI is going to be a thing at some point. But the kind of question was when. And that was the moment for me when I was like, oh, it's actually here. And now's the time to make a move on this. And then that's kind of what led me down the whole AI rabbit hole.
Yeah, you use the term rabbit hole, John. I'm going to pick on that right out of the gates, because it does feel like when we start looking at AI, gosh, is it easy to go down the rabbit hole. There's so many cool tools these days. And I actually think that as an entrepreneur for 17 years now, I've seen that even 17 years ago when I first started, that there were fun tools to play with back then. There were WordPress plugins were starting to come about. There were so many things. There certainly wasn't AI, but now AI brings even more fun tools. How do we avoid this being a rabbit hole for us business owners?
Yeah, that is the challenge. I see that with clients over and over, is it's very easy to get sucked into shiny object syndrome. And this is why it's so tough, because in one sense you have to, because you want to be using the newest, most powerful tools. But if you're constantly switching and moving and trying new things all the time, then you're not going to get the experience and practice to really like leverage them at a high level. So it's being able to walk this fine line between how do I use the best tools, but also making sure that I'm building enough consistency with the same set of tools so that I can actually get good at them, right? And that is a challenge for a lot of businesses that I work with.
Yeah, and you heard in the teaser, I talked to listeners about the fact that on LinkedIn, something that I really value about the value that you put into the world is you stay on top of all of these things, and it makes me feel like I'm staying on top of them thanks to you. And so I'll call out one recent shift is at the time of you and I recording this episode together, OpenAI just released their newest model. And John, it's starting to feel like every month there's a different winner. Last month, oh my gosh, Claude was doing all of these amazing things. This month, OpenAI is changing the game. Their image model, by the way, is incredible. I absolutely love the things that I'm seeing there. So in this world of leapfrogging, but at the same time doing what you just shared with us of sticking to the right tools for long enough to get results, how the heck do we balance that? Do we have to sign up for all these different subscription tools?
Yeah, I was talking with a client yesterday, and they just signed an enterprise contract with OpenAI. And this is one of the big challenges of the space, is that in this world where like the field reinvents itself 90 days, how do you like bet on winners over the long term, especially as a business, right? Where like there's a lot of other requirements and things. It's not like you can just pick up and put down the stuff super easily. So I would say right now, most of my clients, I'm either going to, recommend let's go the Claude ecosystem or the OpenAI ecosystem. Those really right now seem to be like the two favorites. But it is an open question, right? Because last month, it's like, oh, we, get Opus 4.7. Claude has this like big Mythos debut. And it's like, oh, Anthropic's going to run away with this. But then we get GPT 5.5. Codex is now like incredible as this sort of super app. So it's not easy at all. So if you're like a business owner listening to this and you're like having your head spin about it, like that's totally normal. I think those two in particular, they're both so good now. The most important thing is that you're just using one of them, right? Like you're leaving massive gains on the table if you're not using either of those tools. So even if, let's say, Claude Code is better at Codex than certain things and vice versa, the most important thing right now is that you're just using one of these incredible tools and you're practicing and getting good at it and figuring out how this can, drive value in your business.
So John, hearing you say that, I appreciate the fact that you don't just understand technology, you also understand business and you also understand business owners. So in that light, for business owners who are listening to us right now all across the world and they're thinking to themselves, okay, I either have ChatGPT or I have Claude, what does that actually look like? And obviously this is the crux of what you do with Wave 4 is to not just say, hey, you should be using AI, but actually use AI in a way that grows the business. What does that look like? What are those functions that you're helping businesses to leverage AI within?
Yeah, that's a great question. So whenever I work with a business, we should be using AI to do one of two things, which is either create operational leverage or drive revenue. So practically on like the operational leverage side, that either means like time saving, so like process automation, doing things a lot faster with AI, or creating new capabilities, like things that you couldn't do before that AI now allows you to do in your business. Then on the driving revenue side, functionally that's sales and marketing, right? So whether that's doing, automated outreach, qualifying prospects, speed to lead, like real-time sales intelligence, things like that. Those are kind of the two camps that as a business owner, you should think about deploying this in, because that's what's actually going to lead to measurable results that drive the business forward instead of just like implementing cool technology that doesn't necessarily help you.
When it comes to that, John, it's fun for me to bring this into the conversation because obviously we hear from a lot of listeners behind the scenes. And I find that when we do hear from listeners, there's two schools of thought here. One school of thought is, well, John, there's no way AI can do what I can do with regards to marketing and sales, for example. They'll think nobody can replace me in those domains. And then on the flip side of it is the people who are just like, yeah, AI can totally replace me in marketing and sales. And they'll just copy and paste everything, M dashes included. How do we land somewhere in the middle? Because obviously these two schools of thought exist and they are obviously the two biggest extremes, but what does that happy middle and that happy medium look like?
Yeah, and I think you hit on that very well. Like, your prospects, they don't want to hop on a sales call with ChatGPT, and like ChatGPT is not going to close your deals for you, but you can use AI to get, let's say 5 times or 10 times as many sales calls as you're getting right now. Then that's the outcome that you're looking for. So to your point, it's not one or the other. It's finding, like, let's say in sales and marketing, there's certain activities that are ripe for automation if they're very volume driven. Again, like outreach, a lot of stuff that, for example, an SDR would do, like booking meetings, doing outreach, getting the word out. That's all stuff that AI can do at, that 10x level. But then again, you want a person on the sales call closing the deal. People want to buy from other people. The relationship still matters there. So in that context, I think that's how you split the middle. It's finding the parts of your processes in your business that are those ripe candidates for automation that create more opportunities for you to do the human-driven activities that drive the business forward. So it's not one or the other, as you said. It's how do we use them together to create those increased gains.
John, I'm going to pick on a verb that you used right there, a very simple verb, but one that I feel like is such an important takeaway for every listener of this episode, and obviously it is really part of your secret sauce at Wave 4, which is you talk about AI doing things. AI can do cold outreach. AI can do automated outreach. And when we talk about doing, I think that this is a fun conversation that finally more and more people are having in 2026, which is not just prompting, because if we rewind to 2025, it just kind of felt like everybody was using ChatGPT in such a basic way where they were saying, hey, generate a 30-day promo calendar for me for my email newsletter blast or for my social media channels. But when you talk about doing, you actually mean that. You don't mean just prompting and then copying and pasting. What is that doing element? How does AI do things these days?
Yeah, so I think in the last 6 months in particular, there's been this huge shift in that the tools and models are much more capable and agentic now. So if you're just using these tools in the browser and just talking with them, there's still value in that for certain tasks, but you're behind the 8 ball on this, right? Like you can I posted about this on LinkedIn yesterday. You can open up Codex and you can have Codex like write and send your emails for you just using your email, or it can go and fill out a form to get like an interview like this, for example. So I think that that's something that the listeners should understand now, is that the bottleneck is no longer the tools. The tools are so good. Basically, if you have work that you do on your computer now, AI should either be helping you or doing it for you, right? And that sounds crazy to say, but we talked about OpenAI and Anthropic. Claude Code and Codex can do pretty much most of the work that you can do on a computer now. So if you're not leveraging that to aggressively bring that into a lot of what you're doing, then you are behind of where we are now. Like these tools are so proactive, they can drive and use a lot of the softwares that you use. Like for example, like 6 months ago, I was doing like custom, let's say CRM automation using like make.com or N8N or things like that. Well, now we just have Claude Code just use the CRM on our behalf, right? So that's kind of been this shift that we've seen to where I think last year people were talking up agents a lot of like being a thing and like agentic capabilities, but now it's like here and it's a real thing and you need to be using it in your business.
John, you've got a particularly powerful voice in this space because of your career history and your career experience. Obviously, you are not coming from a place where you're just willy-nilly inventing something on your own and saying, no, this is totally cool, let's do it. You come from a place where you've worked inside of enterprise businesses. You've worked at one of the largest companies in the world when it comes to being a trusted advisor for growing businesses. So a lot of people, obviously a big concern is security. And they're saying, John, you're telling me I can give my LLM of choice access to my CRM? Won't bad things happen there? Talk to us about that side of the coin, because it is a real consideration these days.
Yeah, so that's been a big differentiator for us at Wave 4 is, being someone who, cut my technical chops in the enterprise and then bringing that to customers, because it's a concern for everyone. For example, I'm working with a wealth management company right now. Security cannot be an afterthought for them, right? They're managing people's money. That has to be front and center. So I think there's two sides to think about security when it comes to AI. The first is that a lot of the security concerns that people have are the same that exist with the rest of the software stack, right? So, for example, people are worried about, hey, I'm turning my data over to OpenAI and Anthropic. Well, you're doing the same thing with Microsoft when you're using Outlook, and they not like they're reading your emails, but you're using their tools. They have access to it, right? So it's very similar to that, where a lot of these software tools that you're using, you're consenting to use the platform, and so it's not like they're going to go in and read all of your stuff or your chat history or your emails, but they know that it exists, right? And so you should be mindful of that when using these tools. So there's that element. And then the other side of this is the kind of, let's call it the reverse risk, which is the tools are too powerful to not use. And you're more than welcome to say, oh, I'm not going to use these because of the risk profile that they create, which is a lot smaller than people think. Again, this is assuming, right, you're using best practices. We have access controls. We're training our employees on the best practices of like how to safely use these things. But the bigger risk is you not using them and your business getting left behind, right? So there is the cyber risk, which it's kind of the same that exists with a lot of the other software stack. I think the thing that's different about AI is that you have to, similar to like training people on phishing, for emails, there has to be more training around AI to use it safely. Because again, the user error is probably the biggest risk. But at the same time, like, you need to be able to start integrating these things, because the bigger risk is you not using them and getting left behind, or, basically dominated by an AI powered competitor at this point.
John, hearing you talk about that, I have an appreciation for your perspective on it, because I know that you work with businesses of all different sizes. And that's something that a lot of listeners of this show, they're very avid AI users, and they're always looking for that edge, which is why we're so excited to have you here on the show today. As soon as we came across your work with Wave 4 and all the stuff that you put out there, we were so excited to reach out and invite you onto the show. And along those lines, that's a fear, a very real fear for business owners, is even if I am investing in myself by listening to amazing guests such as you, by watching YouTube videos, by doing all of the things, how do I make sure that my team members are doing that? Because ultimately, a lot of our productivity is driven by our team members. What does that look like? Part of me recently, I've been wondering, I'll share this with you here publicly on the air. Part of me recently, I was like, should we just have an internal team meeting every single month where we just hang out on a Zoom call and we just go around the room of, here's what I'm building, here's what I'm doing, here's my normal workflow, here's how I injected AI and automation and all of that into our flows. What's that look like? Because you help businesses of all sizes implement it. What's the team component look like?
Yeah, so training is so important, right? Because one of the things that's unique about AI is, like, let's say you open, we were talking about Outlook before. When you open Outlook on your computer, hey, this is a tool that I use for emails and writing and sending and receiving emails. But when you open an AI tool, it's like this blank slate, right? And it's like, well, what can I do? What possibilities exist? So the training is really important, because one of the gaps that we've seen with working with a lot of clients is that, their foundational AI knowledge is often so low, like they don't even know what to do with these tools. So you can build and implement all sorts of solutions, but if people don't know how to use them, it's not going to get any adoption. So the training is really, really important. And the training, like, functionally, what usually happens with most organizations, and this is kind of how we approach it, is the goal is to get everyone to be a 2X employee, which is, making sure that, hey, if everyone in this organization can use this to save, let's say 3 hours a day on their work, then in the aggregate, that adds up fast. If you have an organization of, like, even 20 people, that's a lot of time savings in a week. But it's also identifying what we like to call, like, your AI champions. So who are those people who have the skills, the aptitude to be those 10X employees? Because those are the ones who are going to really drive the business forward. Because one of the things that we've seen so far is, you want to train everyone so that everyone's getting gains out of this, but naturally there are people, and it's not always the people you expect. Like, you would think, like, oh, it's going to be like the more technical, like IT people, or, someone with a more development background. That's, like, often not the case. It's often the people who are the most, like, creative and, like, willing to try things. Those are the people who usually lead to being those 10X employees. So the way that every business should think about training their people on AI is, how do we raise the floor of the entire organization? And then at the same time, how do we identify those people who are going to be those 10X employees who are going to really drive the business forward and be able to do, amazing stuff for us?
Yeah, I love that approach. And also, just from a culture perspective, that creates great teams that learn from each other, that encourage each other, that uplift each other. And then that becomes a flywheel inside of our internal culture. So, John, I really love that approach. Super grateful for you sharing that with us. And you asked a big question inside of that answer, though, that I want to go deeper into, which is, wow, this is such a cool tool. What the heck do we do with it? And obviously, that is part of your process with Wave 4, is that you have a really cool way of going inside of a business and identifying what are those high leverage ways. What does that process look like for you to make sense of a business and then identify the most tangible ways for them to move forward?
Yeah, so when I first started doing this, clients would come to me and be like, I want to do X, or I want to do Y. Like, I want to put a chatbot on my website, or I want to be able to do, like, automated reporting of financials or things like that. And when you take clients for the use cases that they want, sometimes they understand the use case that's going to help them and you deliver a really great result. And then other times they have no idea and you build it for them and it doesn't really help them at all. So that's kind of what's led to the approach that we use now, which is we start with every client with what we call like an AI opportunity assessment. And functionally what that is like a business audit. So like people, processes, technology, and it's not even about AI. It's just learning about the business, the problems, the bottlenecks, the opportunities. And we use that to determine what are the best use cases and solutions to implement. The same way that when you go to the doctor doesn't prescribe you any medicine until they like evaluate what your symptoms are. It is a very similar approach that we use, and it's gotten to a lot better results for clients, because when a client comes to you and they're like, I want this AI solution, they're generally not knowledgeable enough about AI to know if that's really the thing that they need or if what's going to help them. So by taking this more diagnostic approach, one, it allows us to kind of uncover those gold mines from interviewing employees, seeing how the processes work, so that when we do implement a solution, it actually is like driving measurable results in terms of like lots of time savings, or maybe it's a speed to lead solution that really helps them boost their sales. But doing it that way has led to a lot better results instead of just like building ad hoc solutions, because you need to understand the business fully and where their pain points are to be able to use AI to deliver a solution that's really going to help them.
John, hearing the way you talk about that, where my head goes, and you talking about the knowledge level of your clients and the businesses that you work with, I would imagine that sometimes they think the solution just has to be AI because it's 2026 and everyone just wants to throw AI at everything. But I'm sure some of the time, inevitably, the real solution is simply automation. Talk to us about that difference between automation and AI, because I feel like some people understand one side of the coin but not the other, or they completely blur the lines and they think, well, yeah, John, I need an AI solution that when someone submits a form, it sends them a calendar invite, or that's obviously a very basic one. But talk to us about that differentiation and, of course, the teamwork between both automation and AI.
Yeah, so often AI is like the sexy term, right, that gets you in the door, because businesses know that they need to be using this, and that's what like sparks their curiosity. But as you said, like a lot of what these businesses need, and what's been really funny to me as doing this, is they need obviously like business process automation, right? And sometimes we're using AI to do that. Like now, again, with I mentioned Claude Code, for example, a solution that we would be building in like a make.com or an N8N 6 months ago. Now we could just teach Claude Code how to do that. So like it is automation, but we're using AI as a tool to do that. Whereas maybe before we would be using a lot of the more like bread and butter, like workflow automation tools to deliver that solution. So I think that line is kind of like, it's getting blurred. Whereas before, I think it was much more distinct. It was like, here's the LLM, right? That's an AI tool. And then there's like these workflow or just like automation platforms like Zapier, make.com, N8N, things like that. Now I think that's getting blurred because the tools are more agentic now. And that's exciting for me because it makes it easier to build and implement this stuff, but it also gives them more capabilities. So that's kind of an evolving trend that we're seeing right now. But the other interesting part is what a lot of these businesses need is sometimes it's neither AI nor automation. Maybe it's that they have like a lot of technical debt and they have bad IT practices. Maybe the process is incredibly flawed to begin with, and let's say a form is passing through 3 layers of review and moving all across the organization when really it only needs to be seen by one person. So that's kind of been an interesting thing with this. Sometimes you're not doing even AI or automation. It's just like business consulting sometimes before we actually build or implement a solution that's going to help solve that problem.
Yeah, I want to go deeper into that agentic piece because it is a term that's thrown out there a lot. People have for sure heard of it up to this point. But John, let's use me as a very lame example here. Is that for a long time I've used this very simple tool. It's like $1 a month that I pay. It's simply called If This Then That. And so the spoiler alert is right there in the name of the tool, that is the logic that it can execute. If this, then that. And so one such rule that I have in there is if I leave the radius of my house, turn the lights off. That is very simple. If this, then that logic that has been used in computers for decades and decades, far older than what both you and I are. So a lot of people are familiar with what that if this, then that logic looks like. How does injecting AI, how does having a brain that can make decisions, that agentic piece, how does that change those historic workflows?
Yeah, I think what it helps solve for is a lot of the edge cases. Business is messy, right? It's very rarely, that's why building software is so hard, because you have to be able to accommodate all these different things. To your point of the example of like leaving the house, then the lights turn off. In business, sometimes it could be that where it's like, oh, well, if I get an email from this person, then we're going to set a meeting on the calendar. But what happens if I get an email from that person and they have a form that they want me to fill out? Do I still like book a calendar invite? So I think the exciting thing for businesses is now that these the models are much more intelligent now. They're still far from perfect, but they do a lot better job at understanding the messy context of business, especially when you can teach and train these things on the way your business works. So I think that's the biggest shift, is that it allows more flexibility that's like more realistic of how businesses actually work, because very few businesses, even if they're, building software, for example, are very black and white and everything's clean and logic based. There are maybe subsections within the business where it's like that. But I think that's what's exciting about having these more agentic models and tools, is that they're better able to accommodate kind of the real life messiness of how all businesses are.
So John, let's talk about messiness for a second then, because a lot of businesses, myself included, we have quite messy tech stacks that we're paying for every single month. I fully appreciate the fact that you've called out some real life tools that have had to answer some tough questions over the past 6 months as the big LLM players have gotten more powerful. The N8Ns of the world, Make.com, Zapier, all of which are tools that all of us business owners have used in some capacity before. Are we at the point where we can minimize our tech stacks now and just go in on our Anthropic subscription or our OpenAI subscription? What should our tech stacks look like these days?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at this point, as we're recording this in April 2026, I think it's very reasonable to say, probably at least, especially as a small business. Again, there's a big difference between enterprise software, right, with all these sorts of different requirements and different sorts of, maybe there's compliance or things like that. If you're a small business, though, and you're listening to this, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that maybe a third of your tech stack could be shaved off and replaced by AI. As an example, I used to have like Pipedrive as my CRM, and I'm paying like $150 a month for that. And then one day I wake up and I'm like, well, I don't even need like 80% of the functionality of this. And so then, you just go into Claude. Hey, this is what I'm using Pipedrive for. Can we build a custom CRM? Right. And so now I have a custom CRM, right, that I run for my business. Done the same thing for a number of clients, is that there are probably tools that you are paying for, which you are using probably less than half of the functionality of. Those are prime candidates for you to just replace that and build that yourself with AI. Because as a small business, it's a lot easier to build a working solution that can accommodate your scale, versus in the enterprise, for example, it's such a heavy lift that it's a little bit harder to do that. So again, I think that's something that's really exciting as a small business. And one of the reasons I like working with small businesses is that there are absolutely opportunities for you to save on software and build it yourself now, which I don't think we could have said that like even 6 months ago.
Yeah, it's crazy. I had a moment last week where I was writing my email newsletter to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur audience, and I wanted to embed a tweet, John. And obviously embedding inside of an email is not the best technology in the world. And so I thought to myself, if only I could drop the URL of this tweet into some tool and it would generate an image of the tweet, and I could just embed the image into the email. It's so much easier. And so it was the first time in my life that instead of Googling to see if such a tool existed, I simply opened ChatGPT. I told it, hey, I wish this tool existed, create a super basic web app. 3 minutes later, I had a working web app doing exactly that. And I thought to myself, this is so cool that this is the world that we live in these days. And 6 months from now, John, you and I are going to have an even more fun and exciting conversation about how much AI has developed. So super grateful for all of these insights. And I'm really excited to see how you answer this last question, because time has flown by, but this question's super broad, so you can take it in any direction you want. And that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and knowing that you are one of us, you're a fellow entrepreneur, what's that one thing you want to leave them with today?
I would say, obviously, I'm very biased because this is what I do, every day for businesses. But lean into these tools as much as you possibly can. AI is going to be the competitive differentiator of the next decade. And if you're running a business, you're thinking about starting a business, anywhere in between, this is the most exciting thing and opportunity I think that maybe we've ever had, because you can get access to the most powerful tools that are available for $20 a month on a subscription, or even $100 a month on a subscription. And the things you can do with that is incredible. So I think as you think about what type of business am I starting, what type of business that I'm running, that really doesn't matter. You should think about, how do I get as good at AI as I possibly can? Because the things you can do now with these tools are incredible. And, I say this all the time, this is the worst that they're ever going to be, right? The pace of innovation and change is incredible. And if you want to remain competitive in the business landscape over the next decade, this is the best thing you can do, is just figuring out, how do I get really, really good at AI?
Yes, what a time to be alive. And John, I'm so grateful for entrepreneurs and innovators and leaders such as yourself in this space. I'm going to call it out, because even just following you on LinkedIn, it's not that you just keep us updated, but I really appreciate how you share your thoughts. You share your vantage point, your expertise, because you're in the game and you're actively doing this and helping businesses move forward. So super grateful for that advice for our listeners. And I'm also very excited for listeners to, just like me, continue to get value from you. So John, for listeners who want to find you online and all the cool stuff that you're doing, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the best place. That's where, I post my thoughts, work that I'm doing for clients, cool tools that I'm using, just trying to share as much knowledge from there. That's probably the best place to start. Then from there, you'll find like my website and all of that stuff. Again, if you're more serious about like, hey, how can Wave 4 help me in my business? Then that's probably the best place to go is my LinkedIn.
Yes, and listeners, you don't have to go very far to find John on LinkedIn. We are linking directly to him down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. So you can click right on through, and literally, this is somebody who is actively putting good stuff out there. Oftentimes, if you see a great content creator and you think to themselves, do they hold anything back? This feels like really good stuff. John is one of those people who just abundantly shares in the world. So John, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. This was great. I really enjoyed it.